right, it's the country. Weekend edition, originally recorded September 19th, 2023. We had a great conversation with my English friend, Gerard Scot-Brining. We're bringing it to you now live without editing.
All right. We are on with Mr. Gerard Scot-Brining. How are you, sir?
It's on. Yeah, I'm good. It's been a long time, well, as soon as I saw you post up that you were starting this new concept, I was like, I was just reminded of the days when you and I used to debate, and we had good debates. You know, we didn't get angry, we didn't lose it, we didn't get defiant. We listened to each other, and I was like, I want to be a part of that. You know, I want to bring back the old days again. But I have to warn you, I'm a bit disenfranchised by the press. So I don't read a huge amount of press anymore. I generally read headlines and make my own determinations rather than read into the language and the details of it, because regardless of which media outlet it is, it's all agenda based. The language is all predetermined because of the language of that particular outlet. So you might ask me questions today of stuff I know nothing about. Like when you caught that Chinese question the other day about China taking over Parliament, I was like, what the hell is he talking about? I had to go and Google it. Like, oh, right, okay, so they found a spy, brilliant. You know, so I just put my hands up and say, there may be a lot of stuff that I say I just don't know.
Yeah, no worries, dude. It's funny. I did that because I have not been following UK politics, but I did see a story a week or two ago about some Chinese infiltration of Parliament or some such like that. I mean, and I was curious what your thoughts are, but it sounds like maybe it's not really news over there.
Well, no, I mean, I've read about it now, and actually, it's become more news in the last 24 hours because now there's going to be a case. The politicians are being warned not to talk about it. But I guess you have to be naive to think that this isn't happening in every Western government.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just because one person got caught over here, that's a good thing in my opinion.
Yeah.
There's probably 10 of them that are getting caught in my government, in your government, in French governments, in all the Western powers. You know, I mean, ultimately, lobbying and infiltration is what governments and corporations do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because they're all trying to drive their agenda through stuff, and you know, so the Chinese government wanting to, I think it's a bit silly because their goal was to ultimately maintain their message through our government. Well, I don't think there's anyone in our House of Commons that agrees to their message. So I don't know what the real impact would have been, having someone on the inside to push the communist message out. So, but hey, yeah, it's happened. We caught them, so that's a good thing. Yeah. Let's keep catching them.
That's right. That's what I worry about, because we've had the same stories, and I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. I did write an article actually before I really started to do the country full time about China. I'd read a book by Josh Rogan over here about China, and part of it is certainly about how they've infiltrated the American society. You know, everyone from politicians to think tanks to universities and their endowments. And all sorts of crazy things. Like there was a story about, so the Uyghurs are a very well-known sort of issue in China. It's somewhere in the west of China, in Jiangping or something like that, where there's this Muslim population of 1 million people that are called the Uyghurs, and they're like, allegedly, I mean, I don't know, you only know what you read or see, right? I've never been to China, but allegedly they're in basically a concentration camp. And not only that, but if their family escapes or somebody leaves, like there's a whole secret police of Chinese people around the world trying to find these people and bring them back. It's an amazing story.
It happened a few months ago, or maybe a bit longer than that, outside the Chinese embassy, where guys came out of the embassy and basically tried to silence someone who was protesting outside. I can't remember the full details of it, but basically it was proving that the Chinese embassy over here was actually spying and trying to push its message out heavily, and it wasn't just acting as an embassy. And it literally broke its own rule, broke the rules by leaving its territory, because an embassy is the nation's territory, coming into our territory, and then trying to manage things the way they wanted to.
Yeah.
Putting that as politely as I can.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they were subterfuging something that they didn't agree with on British soil. But the real problem, I see with communism versus democracy is it goes back to Orwell. And that concept of having an enemy, and if you have a politician in the West and they start to say superlatives and they're very reactionary about stuff, they're called irrational, they're called, unhinged. We want balanced politicians. Whereas if you're a communist dictator, your message has to be strong at home, as powerful, omnipotent, to maintain that power, because you're basically treating yourself as a god. It's a single power. It is not voted in power, and you have to have that sort of that more reactionary despot kind of behavior. So we kind of handle it with kid gloves, and they kind of handle it with like a bully does. Because we have to manage our home agendas. Now, if we turn around and started doing all that bully stuff and started making all these kind of threats and stuff against North Korea, against China and places, and even talking about nuclear arms against Russia, we'd all get scared, and our press would turn around and say the government is taking us to the brink of nuclear apocalypse, and that makes us even more scared, even if it isn't true, because it's posturing, isn't it? And we don't posture in the West, but they have to posture in the East. So, sorry, a bit of a rant there. But I'm a big fan of dystopia novels, and I see the Orwellian culture coming out so heavily between East and West at the moment.
Well, that's what I was thinking about as you were sharing that. Is it's a totalitarian state, and you have to have an enemy, right? Like that's the big thing, is you got to convince the populace that there's this outside enemy. I mean, just like Hitler did with the Jews, and in the Soviet Union, in the Soviet
race.
Yeah, in the Soviet Union, it was the kulaks, I think they were called.
Kulaks, yeah. So this.
But I just want to say one thing real quick. Like I see a lot of that happening in our own country, right? Like in America over the past 7 years, it's been a lot of a little bit of China, but a lot of Russia, right? Like if you think about the way that some of the things with President Trump happened, even to this day, we're fighting this crazy war in Ukraine, or we're not fighting it allegedly. Although I do read stories that we have people there, a few small ones, but we're supporting this, Ukraine war, and there's sort of this concept, the thing that they're convincing the American people of is Russia is completely evil, and if you look at the history of what's happened. I would say, look, Putin's a very bad guy. He's a dictator. He's a totalitarian, whatever you want to call him. But he's acting rationally in the sense that
he wants to reunite the USSR.
Well, I don't know if that's true. So,
he did it with Georgia years ago.
Yeah.
And now we gave him the opportunity to turn around and say, well, I'm not going to sit on the fence anymore about Ukraine. I'm going to pull that in my way because you guys are talking about pulling it your way.
Just so. So, like, my understanding of what's happened, and this may not be all the facts, right? But my understanding of what's happened is back in the early 90s, when the Berlin Wall fell and we were negotiating German reunification with Gorbachev. One of the sticking points was NATO. And look, man, we're going to remove, this is Gorbachev talking, right? Like, we're going to remove all our troops from East Germany. And maybe even, I think eventually, all of the Baltic states and go all the way back to Russia. But you guys can't start moving NATO east. You know what I mean? And I'm not sure that was ever a treaty, but it was discussed. And there's a lot of information out there that this is what we said we would never do. And lo and behold, we've added NATO countries. I think there's 7 or 8 that continue to move east, right? And then Ukraine is sort of in that discussion in the sense that it was pro-Russian, right? There was a revolution in 2014. There are stories that our CIA was heavily involved, and it flipped from pro-Russian to pro-American. You can argue, maybe the people of Ukraine want to be pro-American. There's certainly information out there that many of them are Russian-speaking and want to be Russian.
Yeah, which people, what part of Ukraine?
Exactly. But that was when they, when that happened, when that 2014, coup happened. That's when the Russians invaded Crimea, and they invaded Crimea because they wanted the port on the North Sea.
Yeah, they need a water port, which they don't have.
Yeah. And so, Americans aren't told this, but Ukraine and Russia have been fighting in that eastern Donbas region ever since, right? Like, it has been disputed territory since 2014. Yeah. And then Zelensky gets elected. He actually campaigned on, I'm going to make peace with Russia. And some things happened. I don't understand everything, but it got to the point where Russia was like putting troops on the border of Ukraine and like, look, NATO, we need a guarantee you're not going to add NATO Ukraine to NATO, you know, this, that, and the other. And maybe they were ridiculous requests, but like NATO said, basically go fuck yourself, and boom, they invade. So like, I'm not trying to say, you know, Putin and Russia are like perfect, and you know, whenever I say things like this, you know, what would they do?
We antagonize the situation.
You're a Putin apologist, you get called if you bring up these things. But my thing is, look, if you criticize the church, that doesn't mean you're a devil worshiper, right?
No,
I'm criticizing our policy, and I think we contributed to the feeling of Russia that, you know, they're basically being encircled by NATO and the United States, let's be honest. So is China. And they're like, you know, we don't like this and we're going to push back. So I'm not saying it's right. It's certainly evil, but there's a rationality to it. You know, you imagine, you know, if China, you know, took over Scotland, right? Or maybe Ireland's the better example. Like,
well, they're trying to do it in the South China Sea, aren't they? So they want to take over more stuff in the South China Sea.
Yeah, but if that happened,
the concept is Australia would be the big thing to take over one day because of the land mass.
Yeah, yeah.
But the South China Sea, all these little islands that they want to just take and just.
Oh yeah, and that's crazy. I mean, they basically built a land bridge into a lot of dispute.
Let's go back to Russia. I've got a few interesting points I want to make. I want to step back a bit. So the first thing is that what really upsets me is that most of the world doesn't understand that Stalin killed more than 3 times as many people as Hitler through his genocide.
Yeah,
you know, over 30 million people.
Yeah,
right.
And he even did it by like starving the people of Ukraine.
Yeah, there was cannibalism. Cannibalism and crazy stuff. And but Stalin came to power, and this is where I have to point the finger at the US a little bit. Is that Churchill warned the US towards the end of the Second World War. He said, "Don't give them too many armaments, send people instead." And the US said, "We don't want to send people from the eastern front." So we heavily armed Stalin. And Churchill said, if you do that, he's just going to take Eastern Europe afterwards, because you're going to give him all the tools to do that as soon as the war ends. And unfortunately, Roosevelt, am I getting that right?
Yeah.
Basically said,
it might have been Truman. Roosevelt died at one point. So
this is pre-Truman. Yeah, so this is Roosevelt. Roosevelt ignored that concern. And guess what happened? Once they had all of the tanks and the planes and everything, and the rockets and the missiles, they took Eastern Europe, and the USSR was formed. But what we're seeing now is the second generation. What I think is interesting is that I look at Putin and I say, you're sat at your table, and I get you've got your message, you've got the communist message, and you want to be strong, and you want to be seen as strong, and you can't kowtow, and you can't backtrack. But do you actually think that the West would ever invade Russia? Are we the kind of people and governments that would actually do that? Because again, let's go back to the way that the two sides behave, and we aren't conflicting. We've done some bad conflicts. We can get on a Bush and Blair at some point. I'd love to.
Right? Yeah. That's the first thing that
comes to Gulf War. Well, I lived in the Middle East. I lived through 7 wars out there, and the second Gulf War is something that is a big bone of contention for me. But we're not going to invade Russia. So then it becomes the concept of Russian strength and not kowtowing and not showing weakness, which Putin can't do. So yeah, we antagonized the situation massively with the NATO concept, and we gave him very little ground to maneuver. And so yeah, I can point the finger on both sides. I think we rocked the boat, but he behaved in a way that has caused babies to get bombed.
Yeah, I mean 100%. And it's funny, like whenever, and the thing that I contend with is the national media in the United States and our Democrat Party and the leaders in Washington, who, in my opinion, are a uniparty focused on neoconservatism and basically a military empire in some ways. They don't accept that sort of balanced view. The entire messaging is totalitarian. Is Vladimir Putin is an evil dictator, and we are fighting a righteous war in Ukraine for this amazing democracy. And Zelensky is a hero. And you just start to peel the onion back a little bit, and it's all bullshit. I mean, Ukraine has closed a bunch of TV stations and newspapers that were pro-Russian against the Ukraine current administration. He canceled elections and said, we'll have them when the United States pays for them, sort of thing. You know what I mean? Like there's so much, and you could bring up the battalion, I forget the name of it, that is clearly neo-Nazi, group in Ukraine fighting against Russians. So like,
Well,
this
now
sort of
Ukraine is bombing
black, white, good
inside
versus
Russia as well.
evil is, what's that?
Ukraine is now bombing inside Russia as well, so it's crossing the border, going the
Yeah,
other way,
yeah,
which is an interesting change of events, because I think that's wrong.
yeah.
I think that's just pushing it too far. But let's go back to you made a very interesting point about the governments and that unified vision that is being pumped out through the press, and this unified, and you can't go against it. A bit like the troops concept in the States. Yeah, you can't question war. Have you heard of the concept Schadenfreude?
Yes, and I can't remember what it means. So
Schadenfreude is a German word, and ultimately what it means is that is the fact that people, the way that your brain works, and we got trained on the amygdala, the way your brain works, when you see negativity elsewhere or other people suffering, is that it releases endorphins, and so you get pleasure out of bad things happening elsewhere because it makes you feel better about yourself.
mm-hmm.
And so the media and politicians got hold of this concept, a long time ago, probably back to the Babylonians. Understood that you can control things, and whether you're the media and you're getting the audience, or whether you're a politician and using it as a distraction method to control the message, they understand that. Now, if we had a newspaper that just had happy things about cat saving the tree and all these happy things that came in, we wouldn't read it as much as take CNN with its superlatives. Everything's breaking news. Everything's a disaster. Everything's catastrophic, and all of this. The concept of Schadenfreude comes very heavily into play, and the governments use that to unify the message so they can get on with the other stuff.
Yeah.
And a bit like we've had it. We have it in the UK as well. Where we talk about these single messages. Whether it was Brexit, or whether it was Ukraine, or whether it was COVID, or whatever it is. But in the background, the politicians are keeping that message at the forefront and the biggest noise, and they're getting on with the job on the side, because the people need a unified message to keep them unified, so that we all stick together and we don't start questioning all the other stuff that's going on, and the media doesn't start questioning all the other stuff that's going on. And little things get slipped through the net, and little things happen, and then years later there's an inquiry, or there's a discovery, or something happened, or something was breached, or Boris went and had a party during COVID lockdown. Well, so did the other side, but unfortunately the BBC is the largest TV news outlet in the UK, and people watch TV more than they do read newspapers. Therefore, the message about Boris's side came out more. All this stuff comes out afterwards, but these unified messages are delivered through the concept of fear and concern, because that is what we bite onto and hold onto the most.
Yeah.
So that was a really long explanation of that. But Schadenfreude is prevalent in politics, it's prevalent in the media, and that's why we end up having conversations like this.
For sure. I just saw Arthur Brooks on TV this morning, and he's a Harvard professor. He's like his whole message now is like how to be happy and how to have a fulfilling life, right? But he talked about how that concept that you're talking about is biological, in fact, right? So you go far enough back, caveman sort of mentality 100,000 years ago, like in order to survive, you had to focus completely on the negative, right? Like there's a lion there that will kill people. Oh my God, like you were trained, like we're sort of biologically built to be scared of things and to focus on the negative. And also, he didn't talk about this, but it's also in there, is to be sort of prejudiced against strangers or things and people that
us and them. Us and them is a great way to control your people.
Yeah,
and us and them is the biggest problem this planet has. Whether you look at it on a small scale, about my next door neighbors in my village, or the gossip in my village, up to global politics or global food management. The us and them thing is how we keep people united at a national level, but it also creates the largest problems at a global level.
So that brings up something I was wanting to ask you about. Obviously, Brexit, that happened in 2016, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Your guess is good as mine. It's been so long, and we've had so many crises since then.
Yeah, you remember the world was going to end if people voted for it. But I'm curious. Like, what's been the impact from your perspective? Like, has it been as bad as some might say, or is it better, or
Because what happens? You separate yourself from the European Union from a single kind of connection perspective, and what then starts happening? You start making trade agreements.
Yeah.
you start making individual little agreements about little things, and you say, well, what's the biggest one, and what's the next one, and what's the next one? And from an economic perspective, you start doing it. Yeah, I know there were some challenges in Northern Ireland, and if I'm brutally honest, I didn't read into it as heavily as I probably should because it wasn't affecting me. The main challenge that we have had here, the two challenges we've had, one is supply chain issues. There have been supply chain issues from a food perspective at one point, but then also from a manufacturing perspective. Supply chain issues. And part of that was caused by Brexit, and part of that was caused by the Ukraine war. But it has not impacted life to the point that, that concept of running out of toilet paper, right? They came off the shelves for a few days, but whatever, they were back again, and that was all because of Brexit, apparently. So, the real impact isn't huge. I've got to have a passport again to go to Europe. I've only been a couple of times, but carrying a passport isn't a big deal, and we've severed some of the laws that we mirrored anyway, because say take the European Convention of Human Rights, that's the European Human Rights Act. We created the UK Human Rights Act anyway to mirror it, so we kind of like parodied a lot of it as we went through it. So no, it hasn't been the biggest disaster in the world. It's created some hiccups.
Yeah.
Whether we should have done it or not, that's a very different debate, because I'm a globalist. The more we're united, the less we fight, the less problems we have, the more we can enjoy our life.
Yeah.
That is well in politics.
That's an interesting concept, because I'm sort of on the opposite now. There's a lot of America first talk over here, right? And I think it's because of all that's happened, right? If you look at, you mentioned the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, where our money goes from an American perspective and to what benefit that helps the American people, it really feels like a raw deal. I found out in researching an article recently that the United States, since 2001, between 2001 and 2021, spent $21 trillion on the war on terror. 21 trillion. Like that's more than a year's GDP over that period.
Yeah.
And if you do the math, it's $70,000 for every man, woman, and child in America.
But a lot of that's cyclical. A lot of that gets pumped straight back into the Halliburtons of the world and the the military contractors.
But that's an issue too, right? Like, part of my thesis would be that most of the Ukraine is precisely that. Is 80% of it goes back to the rich military contractors in Washington, and they need their war, to keep going.
It can postpone a recession quite happily.
Well, like if you look, like if you do a search for the richest counties, counties, you have counties in the UK. Yeah. So the richest counties in America, I mean, there's thousands of counties. 7 of the 10 encircle Washington, D.C.
Interesting. And the other 3 over in sort of San Fran and that kind of area.
No, I don't remember if one's in San Fran, but 7 of the 10 are in DC, and it's because they are, military and other types of contractors that are enriching themselves through lobbying, and that's where we feel like we get a raw deal. Like, I would love free trade with every country, but unfortunately, most other countries don't have free trade. We do with Western countries, certainly in some sense. But
what your country was founded on, though, the free trade concept is one of the principles of the foundation of the U.S.
Yeah. But we get a raw deal. Like, you look at, in 1998, China entered the World Trade Organization. And interestingly enough, in the 1996, there was a huge scandal with Chinese funding of the Bill Clinton campaign, which everybody forgets. And less than 2 years later, they enter the World Trade Organization. They're giving most favored nation trading status with the United States. And since then, our middle class has been hollowed out. Our manufacturing's gone, wages have not changed significantly, and everything's manufactured in China. And
or parts of things are manufactured in
China. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly. Yeah.
But no, you're right.
The American people look at that and like, this global thing is, I'm just getting screwed. It's helping all the elite people in Washington and New York and San Francisco and elsewhere. But the rest of us are just, hollowed out, taking opioids.
So on one, that's an interesting topic, because that was lobbying at its greatest, wasn't it? Yes, they are, because it's killing it challenges the middle class and the working class because the manufacturing side dies a bit. It hasn't happened in automotive. I mean, look at Tesla today. But on the other side, it's reducing inflation and keeping things more affordable so people can have the latest stuff. I mean, the concept of a working class blue collar person having a $600 iPhone, right? When you can get a laptop for $300, and that iPhone has a life expectancy of 18 months because consumer electronics are made to cycle every 18 months. That would be a $2,000 iPhone if everything was manufactured in the UK.
Yeah.
In the US, sorry, in the US.
Either one.
So
yeah.
There's kind of I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm saying at the same time, it has brought affordability to a lot of things that has, you could argue, enriched the quality of life of people. I don't necessarily think it's enriched quality of life. I don't need my iPhone to do any more than my Nokia Potato used to do years ago.
I see both sides of it, right? Because I agree with you. There is an economy of scale in the way that global sort of marketplace works. At the same time, like, is the iPhone 15 any better than the iPhone 5? Really?
And 5G. What's 5G giving me?
Yeah, nothing, right? Like, so yeah, there's a guy I like. He's a physicist. His name's Eric Weinstein. He worked for Peter Thiel. So like one of those guys that invested all over San Francisco and now he's like podcast guy, whatever. But he's also a physicist. And his claim is nothing new has been really discovered in physics since the 1970s. And that has also had the downstream consequences of we haven't really invented anything of significance since then either.
The only thing that comes to mind is the LED. Because that has saved power consumption and therefore greenhouse gases. They won Nobel prizes, but you're right.
But that's to me that's a marginal sort of thing. Like it'd have to be he's talking about new things like the internet or the
washing machine.
Yeah,
that liberated women enormously. They've said that that's one of the best inventions ever because it truly liberated women. And people might argue that's a sexist thing, but it's true. You go back to those days, when women were hand washing everything and hand cleaning everything, it liberated it, and that was the beginning of the women's lib movement. That then got them into work, got them into voting, got them into everything else because it's free. I mean that's just an incredible invention.
Yeah. I mean, there's an interesting perspective like that where like if you just look at like providing dinner for the family, right? Like 200 years ago, that was an all-day affair, right? You're making
that stuff on a fire all day so that it was palatable.
Yeah, and you're lucky if there's enough in your cupboard at that time to actually make a dinner as well, right? There's something like before 1800, 98% of the world lived on less than $1 a day. Like it was a scrabble, just to survive for a very long time. And so like I see a lot of I haven't become a protectionist for sure, but I just think there's a lot of folks that get a raw deal, and it doesn't seem like anybody's fighting for those people anymore. Even in in our country, the Democrat Party has been the champion of the working class for generations. They're not anymore.
And they got a new message. Extreme wokeism is their message these days. It's the marginals. That's what they fight on, and that's the way they're running their message. So over here I'm a conservative, but based on your bars over there, I'm a Democrat. But the Democratic message now, is going to smaller and smaller minority groups, and this concept of wokeism, which I think is, it's great that the trans people are getting equality and all of that, but I think it's detracting from. Do you remember I used to say the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing? Mm-hmm. Right, and we're detracting from that, and that is the everybody of a class or the everybody of an environment or an economy, and I think it does detract it because it's easy to fix the minority issue. It's easy to fix the freedom, not the freedom of speech, but the equality issue on a very small minority of people or a new concept or anything like that, because you create a law, you shout out and you say you can't say that anymore, job done. Aren't we great? Let's all pat each other on the back.
I fundamentally disagree with that, my friend. I don't think there should ever be a law saying I can't say something.
No, not you can't say. Well, okay. So to turn around to someone and use a derogatory term against them, for example.
Yeah.
Someone that you don't know that would not take it lightly.
Yeah. You think that should be against the law? I know it is in the UK. I mean, I read the stories about, hey, the cops are coming because you posted such and such on Twitter. Who's the big guy that got? I forget.
I don't think you shouldn't be allowed to say it. I think that if you use it in a form of intimidation or harassment, and therefore it is criminal activity, then you have an issue.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, so when we were kids, and you probably were the same, you would use a derogatory term to a mate when you were telling him he's being an idiot or whatever, or he's wimping out or something. We would
use a gay slur.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But we never turned around and actually meant that homosexual people are like that.
Yeah.
It's just something that came up into our natural language and it just became it. And now today I got to be careful about saying it, but if I turn around and say it to someone, I don't think that should be illegal. I think if I isolated or I went to a gay pride event and there were loads of trans people there and I was shouting hatred at them and intimidating them, you know, and making threats against them whilst using those slurs, then I think you've got an issue.
Yeah, yeah. It's a tough issue. I always go back to, you may not be familiar with this organization. It's called the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. And they've been a champion of the Bill of Rights for probably 100 years in this country and fought for a lot of racial equality for women, you know, people of homosexual or other sexual preferences, what have you. But one of their landmark cases was in the 70s, and they sued some town in Ohio that was not allowing a pro-Nazi march. And they sued the government on behalf of the Nazis. Meanwhile, most of the people that work there, you know, just coincidentally, are Jewish people at the time. But they're still suing. They're still suing for the rights of these Americans to have a Nazi rally in this town. And to me, that is what is freedom. Like the moment that you start to compel speech, like say that I have to say somebody's pronouns, or I can't say a slur or whatever that is, as soon as the government starts to say what I'm allowed to say and not say, that's the beginning of the end of democracy.
And to be honest, it makes it harder to whittle out the people that are going to commit crimes within those marginal groups. So take NAMBLA. Have you heard of NAMBLA?
Yeah.
So the North American Man Boy Love Association, which is legally allowed to exist.
Yeah, the guy used to be on Howard Stern back in the 90s.
He would fight for their rights to have sex with minors.
Yeah,
you know, and legally under the Constitution, they're allowed to exist. You know,
yeah.
I say let them exist and monitor the hell out of them. Mm-hmm. And then the ones that are actually breaking the law, we can figure them out. You send them underground, it'll be harder to whittle out.
It gets worse. Yeah,
let those nasty guys walk down the street. Let's have a look at them and let's figure out who they are. And then let's get the NSA to start monitoring.
No, not the NSA. The solution to bad speech is more speech. Mm-hmm. It's my thing. So if that NAMBLA guy shows up to say something, if I'm at a rally and saying awful things to trans folks, the remedy to that is the people around me calling me out and shunning me. There's this great passage, and I can't remember it off the top of my head, in Common Sense by Thomas Paine, when we, kicked you guys out of our country. And he said,
we gave you part of our country to
I think there was a little dispute at the time.
Hey, we founded it, mate. You're welcome. We founded it. Benjamin Franklin's grandparents are buried in my graveyard. They're from this village, the Franklins.
Yeah. That's awesome. And anyway, he says something like, people have so confounded society with government. And, that's my point, is I don't want the government enforcing this sort of thing about my speech or things that are awful to say. That should be society. That should be you saying, you know what, Justin is a complete idiot. What he says is wrong because of A, B, C, and D, and nobody should listen to him. And here's how you should think about this thing. That, to me, is the remedy to me saying awful things.
What about when it becomes intimidation and harassment? So say I am a trans person, I move into a suburb, and my neighbors find out I'm trans, and they get half the street every single day for 12 hours a day to stand in front of my house with plaques, pointing their fingers and shouting absolute hatred at me. Is that a point where the police should step in?
It's a tough call. I see both sides of that. I'm not sure the right answer there.
I mean, a restraining order, maybe. I'm not saying, they have to.
Maybe. I mean, there are harassment laws and those sorts of things. I think it would depend on the details of such a thing. I think there would be, like you described sort of the worst case, right? 12 hours a day, they're on my yard, and something like that. I think, there is probably some action that ought to be taken, whether it's a restraining order or something like that. Yeah. But, cops showing up and handcuffs and people go to jail, I got a big problem with, unless there's some other, like I say, trespassing on my property, go to jail, right? But
shoot them over there, mate.
For sure, man. We're locked and loaded.
Hey.
We're gonna have to talk about that. But yeah,
so we're going second amendment. We're not going second amendment.
I just think that my preference would be that the law would not be involved, that we would figure out a way to solve it some other way. And I think, there's certainly some laws that could be broken in there. Like I said, trespassing or some harassment or restraint that might solve the issue. It's not easy, but yeah, the government solving it on behalf of us gives me a lot of trepidation.
Yeah, because it then goes into interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
So you make, you guys. So
we have offensive to who? Offensive to who? Right? Like who decides?
And what exactly did you say? Well, we've got a case here that the guy said that, and this has 3 different words in it. Do we now extend it to that? And this situation was ever so slightly different. Do we extend it to that? And so it starts with the policeman, making the arrest, which police are just usually, quite often, police will arrest just to dissipate the issue, and they'll just put them like a drunk, put them in a drunk tank, calm them down, send them home on a caution, which I think makes sense in a lot of cases. But then you get to the point where it becomes judicial, and they turn around and now they've got to interpret stuff, and that's a single person on the day. Mm-hmm. And just his meaning and his agenda.
Yeah, it's like the old there was a case back in the 80s, and I think the ruling was about pornography. And it's like, how do you define pornography? And the judge was like, I know it when I see it. You know what I mean? Like, there's no other way to really define it. So how do you know when this sort of thing that we're talking about crosses the line? And I think most reasonable people know it when they see it. But
that's one of the bases of our law. Is the law, the concept of reasonableness is one of the big underpinning arguments of how our law is determined and evolved.
Mm-hmm. Reasonable doubt. Yeah. All right. So I think I'm gonna make you respond to my statement about the Second Amendment. So it's an interesting.
What's your view on it first, mate?
Yeah, I'm a proponent. I own a gun. I own 2 guns. I never did before.
Is any of them an automatic weapon?
No. Those
so
are.
You haven't got an AK-47.
No, automatic weapons are illegal here. So
in Florida.
No, in the United States.
What about the AR, whatever it is?
Yeah, so that's not automatic. It's what's called semi-automatic.
Right.
Which simply means that, like, when you fire it, you don't have to reset reset a new bullet or anything like that. You can fire it and then fire it again and keep shooting until it runs out of bullets. So it's basically a rifle, and
very high caliber rifle.
It's not really all that high caliber. They're like 223s, which is kind of a small bullet. Like, there's much higher calibers for like killing, moose or elk or something. So mine goes back to what we just talked about, which is the American Revolution.
Okay. Yeah.
So the first thing that the British troops did when they invaded and took over Boston was they rounded up all the guns. Everybody was expected to give their weapons to the Redcoats. Okay. And if you remember, Lexington and Concord, which is the first fight, was the British heard there was this stash of guns out at Lexington and Concord, and they went out to take them. And that's how the first fight started. The old Paul Revere, the British are coming, and that was the first shots fired in the American Revolutionary War. And so after that, and there's some debate here, I wholeheartedly believe that the Second Amendment exists for that very purpose.
You're worried about the British or another country invading.
No, I'm worried about the federal government, my own government.
So you're worried about your federal government, which has control over the military and the police force, will usurp the general population by using that power against them.
Yeah, and look, that's a long eventuality. I'm not some kind of conspiracy guy like they're going to take over tomorrow. But the threat of armed resistance is an important thing in a democracy, is what I'm trying to say.
So wouldn't they just bomb you at a distance?
Well, I don't know. Ask the Taliban. Who won that war?
What, in Afghan?
Yeah. Who won it? Ask the Viet Cong, right? Did they lose? I don't think so. No, and right, so like that argument that like, oh, we got F-15s, you know, okay, who's flying that F-15? They're going to drop a bomb on Omaha, Nebraska, where their family lives. Is that what you're saying?
No, I get it. You
know what I mean? But no, I'm.
So why is there a concern of it? Let's go back to the roots of this. Why is there a concern that the federal government one day is going to turn around and become this fascist dictatorship and put the military on every street and lock down everything?
History. I mean,
what, history of America?
History of governments everywhere. Yeah, I mean, you know, the broad sort of avenue of history is that governments become dictatorships if they don't start that way. I mean, you know, there's a few examples of us moving away from that, right? Here in America and in the Western European countries, to some respect, I would say. But yeah, I mean, you know, look at some of the complaints around Donald Trump. I mean, we're not very far removed from somebody taking over and declaring a dictatorship. I mean, look at COVID-19 and all the lockdowns and that sort of thing. Look at all the ways that people resisted and the way that they were censored, right? There was just a court case here in America and in Missouri where the judges determined that the White House, the CDC, and other elements of the government were suppressing speech while they're locking down people and saying you can't leave your homes. And so like, and you know, you listen to some of the politicians talk now, like they want to get rid of the Electoral College. They want to get rid of the Senate. They want to expand the Supreme Court to put their judges in so they can change everything. You know, like there's some serious authoritarian threats, I think, around the world. Like if you took the last 20 to 30 years and you would say this, and I think you can find this on the interwebs as well, like in terms of how much democracy there is in the world, it's waning. And look, I'm not saying
democracy is an illusion, because again, let's go back to the media concept.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that that's likely to happen tomorrow, but you know, I have homeowners insurance, you know, just in case a hurricane comes and knocks my home over. And so it's not so much like I think next week we're going to have an armed fight with, you know, the U.S. Army. It's the government has no right to take my possessions. You know, the entire concept of Western democracy is I have inalienable rights given to me by my creator. And governments are instituted to protect those rights, not to take them away from me. I have a right to own a firearm before there was America. I have a right to a firearm. I have a right to own a firearm before there was a king of England. You know, so
let me come out with two. Yeah, let's park the concept of whether you should legally be allowed a gun and it's your right. Let's go to two different things. Two arguments about how the rules are have allowed gun crime. So first of all, I'm going to hit you with a statistic. The US has 10 times the murder rate in the UK, and has 40 times the gun murder rate in the UK, which kind of indicates that guns kill people. Right? Now, this is part of that. Now, I've got two different points that I want to make. The first point is that we have shotguns over here for hunting, right? And you have to go through licenses, and in France, it's even more strict with annual renewal of licenses, and you've even got to go through exams to show how you can gut every type of animal. But in your house, you have a shotgun. You can only carry it to a hunt and away from a hunt. In your house, the shotgun has to be in a cabinet that is separate and X distance away from another cabinet that has your shells in it, right? Okay? Because the goal is not for burglars to get blown up, right? In fact, if you shoot a burglar and they're unarmed, you go to jail over it, which is another argument. So one side is just how we control people who do use guns, right? Who use guns for nice things like hunting and stuff. And then there's the second argument of the right to carry. So should you be allowed to be in a position where your 6-year-old can pick up your gun and go to school and start shooting up people? And should you be allowed to just walk around with a gun? Because surely if the goal is to prevent a government revolution, you don't need the gun until that's happened. And you're carrying it that day isn't going to make a scrap of difference. You can go home and get the gun and then you can all unite and you can go find the government. So maybe like the movement of guns and how guns have to be stored, would reduce the crime impact. Because that right to carry, that hidden right to carry and the concept of walking around with a gun in your pocket. I knew an American friend from one of the southern states, and she was robbed at gunpoint one day, and she was like, so then I got a gun, I got a right to carry it, and I put it in my purse. Next time that happens to me, I'm going to blow the guy's brains out. I'm like, are you kidding me? The moment you know that that's happening to you, the gun is already pointed at you. You do not have time to reach into your handbag, pull the gun out, and then shoot the bloke. A bit like in a school massacre, let's get more guns and let's put guards on the station. Well, guess what? The guy that's going to do the massacre is going to walk up behind that bloke and kill him and then go on his massacre, right? So this concept of arming in public and this right to carry, to me, and how guns can be freely just left around the place, to me, that exacerbates the issue of gun crime.
Yeah. I see where you're coming from. I want to respond in a couple ways. Like, certainly the statistics, you're absolutely right. I would say, though, that, and I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, the vast majority of murders committed with a gun in America is, number one, with a gun that is illegally obtained. Okay. Yeah. And number two, it is a drug crime in our inner cities.
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
And so, I think that is a big part of the delta between the two of us. And it's a societal problem that I don't think is the ultimate cause is guns. The ultimate cause is the way we have abandoned our inner cities, and especially African-American youth. And that's the problem to be solved. The gun culture and the crime and the murders are symptoms of that problem. Okay. And I don't think you have that same problem there, or to the same extent.
So we had a school shooting decades ago, right?
Yeah, and everybody turned in the guns, right?
We had an amnesty and we took the guns. Now, to the point that if a gun is confiscated, say from a gang-related crime, guns are bought and sold to commit an individual crime now in England by gangs. They can trace that back through 6 different crimes that were done by 6 different people because of the lack of supply. Now, it's a lot harder to stab someone than it is to shoot someone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I agree. So then the second thing, my only argument for guns is not, like, philosophically, it's a constitutional, what I described before about our relationship with the government, but it's not just that reason, in my opinion. And so the second thing is, certainly the overwhelming amount of gun crimes that occur are with illegal guns by criminals. The folks like me,
made more readily available because guns are available in America very easily.
Certainly. But you're going to take my gun away when I'm a law-abiding citizen that has a right declared by our creator to own such a thing because of somebody else's behavior.
Okay, so do you think that all drugs should be legal?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, that's the tough question.
No. Right. Go ahead.
I believe in the legalization of all drugs because it gets rid of the drug dealers. And if you actually look at drug gang crime here outside of London, it's Albania, for example, is prolific in the rural areas. So yes, it is a tough argument to say, take away this because someone else will abuse it.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, so that's an issue. And then the other thing, there are stories, and I can send them to you. I don't have the top of my head, but there are tons of stories of folks who are armed, carrying a gun in America, stopping crimes and stopping mass shootings. And that's kind of, it goes back to what you were saying before. The media doesn't report it because it doesn't fit the narrative.
No.
But it
So there's
happens
also there's
it
an equal number
happens
of
all the
stories.
time. And then, I'm sorry, go ahead.
There's an equal number of stories about the black kid who went to the wrong house by accident and got his head blown out, and he was a kid.
Yeah, absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And then the other thing with schools and movie theaters. So where the mass murders, mass shootings take place is almost invariably gun-free zones. So it's illegal to have a gun at a school in America. It's illegal to carry it into a movie theater, or it's not everywhere, but I think, most local laws are that way. You can't take it into a movie theater. That's where the criminals go to shoot up people because they know there's not going to be anybody there with a gun.
Okay.
Okay. And then, look, man, like, this, I'm sorry, what did you say just before that? I lost my train of thought.
Was it about the 2 points, or was it about the kid getting his head blown off because he went to the wrong house?
Yeah. And that's an issue. Look, and if you want to have, like, my gun, I have two safes. One is under my bed. It's a handgun. And the other is a rifle. It's in a safe, right? So I think gun safety is very important. I think you would find if you like flew over America and visited places where, law-abiding folks have guns, they're mostly locked up. This is the other point I wanted to make. I don't know the exact total, but I think it's about 10 times the number of people die in car accidents every year. Okay.
Yeah.
We could enact a law that says the new speed limit is 5 miles per hour. Right? Nobody would ever die in a car accident.
Or everyone has to take the bus.
Well, there'd still be accidents potentially, but we could make the speed limit 5 miles per hour and no one would ever die in a car accident again. Why don't we do that? Because there's trade-offs. There's other things happening, and we decide, look, it's okay for a certain number of people to die in a car accident so I can get to work on time. Right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's statistics of how often the vehicle is used versus how many, how many accidents happen versus how many times a gun is used against how many issues that happen. So I would say that every time a gun is used is probably like a case of 60% of the time someone's getting hurt or killed. Whereas every time a car is used, 0.0000001% of the time there's an issue happening there.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. But yeah, so like I go back to, right, like, what if they decided nobody gets to have a car anymore because everybody else is speeding?
What do we get instead, though? I mean, as long as there's a good thing instead, like a driverless vehicle, I'll be up for that.
Yeah, maybe.
I'd love to be able to be in a car and be working or playing a game and having a beer.
Oh, so you like this. So I'm now reminded of my theory of partly why, folks like me and many in America are so adamant about the Second Amendment and other things. Okay. You think of how we were formed, right? Georgia was a penal colony, just like Australia was in the United Kingdom, right? So like, okay, you can be hanged or we can send you to Georgia. Which do you want to do? Right. And the folks that left the United Kingdom, Germany, all the other European countries, and down to this day, Ireland, China, wherever they came from all over the world, they were the poor. They were people seeking to find a new life because they were downtrodden wherever they were for the most part. Now you get, the first guys here were rich, aristocrats, but then the vast majority of people that ended up here, they either were rejected by or rejected themselves European society.
Yeah, I've got a point to make about that in a minute, but you keep going.
And so, there's a fundamental kind of the king, fuck that guy. You know what I mean? Like, and it is in our culture. It is an independent, we still idolize the Wild West, where you go out there, there's no law. It's hard scrabble. You get what you work for and you earn for and you protect.
You are what you can make of it. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. And there's bad guys out there that want to take what you have. So you better protect your family. And I think that's still the culture of today, right or wrong. And I think, this is the part you might disagree with, that a lot of folks that didn't make that voyage and stayed in Europe sort of have a serf-like attitude towards their government, where they provide for me, they take care of me, I do what they say,
It's a
I
big
don't
minority.
question it.
It's a real minority there. But I know what you're getting at.
Yeah.
In fact, you'll find that the working class is kind of f the government and f the not the royalty, but the government in particular. You know, a lot of them are like, well, why should I do that? What they, you know, I don't like them. What they done.
Why should I trust them? Why should I trust
them? While they're getting a handout.
Yeah. While they're enriching themselves, you know, everybody that goes to Congress gets a salary of $175,000, and 8 years later is a 10 millionaire. How does that happen? Right? They're all, so fuck them. I don't care what they think, and I don't care what they say. They're not going to take my rights away from me. Period. You know, like that's the attitude. So
I get it. And you know what? It was all about, you know, when all land was free, because there wasn't a government to pin it down and all of that. You know, people said, right, I'm going to take this chunk and I'm going to build a sheep farm, or I'm going to do whatever I want for, you know, build something, and I'm going to make it my own. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to take the challenge head on. And so that's, and also, you know, one side of it is your provenance, right? And the other side of it is also the more recent history of the availability of something. No one likes having something taken away. If alcohol was invented tomorrow, it would be put right up there at the top as one of the worst drugs that should be done, next to white sugar, which is still the biggest killer on the planet. You know, white sugar killed the most people in the 70s. It's killing the most people today. You know, if they invented both of those two today and they put it up against all the way down to heroin, those two would be the ones that they're banned because it's bad. But no one's going to take my beer away now. No one's going to take my cigarette away now.
That's right. That's right.
So,
but even worse, dude. So I would make it even a stronger argument that you just made about white sugar. In the 70s, you look at pictures of people in the 70s, what do you notice immediately? Everybody's skinny. Yeah. There are no fat people.
For white bread.
Yeah. And what happened, at least in our country, I don't know about yours, but in our country, they came out with this saturated fats, and fats are killing you. Everybody's having heart attacks because of that. So stop eating fat, which also contain a lot of protein, right? And start eating all this bullshit, corn syrup. Yeah, like the low-fat shit they shoved a bunch of sugar into to make it palatable for the American people. And we're all and we all have diabetes now. You know what I mean? So in that sense, this is sort of my thesis, right? Is like, not only did that happen, but the government made it happen. They hurt all of us, you know, pretending to help. And why did they do it? Well, there's a corn lobby.
Yeah, like
Iowa is the first state where they vote in the primaries for the president, and you better come out for corn, or you're not going to win that primary, and you're never going to be president. And that's why it happened. You know,
corn-fed cattle as well, corn-fed chickens.
Yeah,
everything is corn-fed these days. For us, it's sugar beet. So all of our white sugars and all of that comes from sugar beet, not corn. Yeah. We're not a big. Europe isn't a big corn place, probably because of the climate and the environment. Yeah. But for us, it's sugar beet. And then of course you've got palm oil as well, which is just deforesting half the planet in Indonesia and all of those kind of places.
Oh, it's terrible.
Because it's cheap to put in products, and it's in everything from your shampoo to food.
Yeah.
You know, because it's
simple. And it's such a laborious process to make that stuff too. Like you ever see a palm nut? It's like this size. It's like a walnut. And you know, in order to get enough oil out of it to produce that stuff, it's ridiculous.
I've moved on to over here. I don't even use olive oil anymore, because olive oil has a very low burn point, and it only has 3 of the 8 amino acids that are actually good for you. So I use rapeseed oil, which has all 8 of the amino acids that are good for you, none of the bad fats that are bad for you, and has a very high burn point, so it reduces the risk of cancers. And rapeseed oil, guess what? It's made in Britain, so it's reduced the carbon footprint of it as well. You know, so there's a double positive impact by me moving to that. One, for my health, second, from a carbon footprint perspective. You know, and why aren't we shouting this around the place? Why is everyone saying, "Oh, I love a good bit of olive oil"? And rapeseed oil tastes really good. Like cold pressed rapeseed oil tastes just as good, if not better, than olive oil when you're putting it on a salad or something like that. So you've got the corn, we got the sugar beet, and then there's the cattle issue, which is like probably the number one negative thing for a carbon footprint on the planet now. But yeah, anyway, how did we get onto this? Where were we before?
I don't know. But I will say we have grapeseed oil in the kitchen downstairs as well. We still have olive oil. I agree with you. I mean, those are basically what I use. I do use butter. I know that's obviously a no-no, but I will use it. It has a certain, yeah, it has a low smoke point as well. So you gotta throw some grapeseed in with the oil, and then
Yeah, so I use butter for pasta aioli,
yeah.
which I absolutely love. But yeah, but you know, so do you remember? So yeah, we're going back to the whole government ramming stuff down our throats. Do you remember the accounting story that we were told about Popeye?
No, what is it?
Right. So this is brilliant. So the Second World War's ended, right? Americans are malnourished. They've got to figure out what superfoods, in particular, they're malnourished in calcium and in certain vitamins. And they go like, well, we can't get enough animals to feed the population, so let's go through the vegetables and figure out which is the best superfood, right? And so they went through it all and they turned around and they said, my God, it's spinach. It's got like 10 times the other vegetables have. So Popeye was created.
Oh yeah, Popeye.
Right?
I didn't understand. Yeah, yeah.
To make you eat spinach.
Your American accent is off. It's Popeye.
Yeah, Popeye. And it's Putin. Yeah, so Popeye was created to ram the concept of eating tinned spinach, which is not nice. Fresh spinach is nice, but tinned spinach is pretty awful. Down people's throats for a health perspective. They went back to the math like 40 years later, and the guy had made an error, and it was a decimal place out. It was actually a tenth the amount of calcium that they thought. So Popeye was created on an accounting error.
Yeah.
Isn't that brilliant?
Yeah, and that's the point, man. Like, I don't, it's kind of like just a base skepticism. I don't trust anybody making a claim that doesn't make sense to me. Even sometimes I don't believe claims that do make sense to me until I investigate it. But if it's from the government, I immediately say they're probably lying or they're probably wrong. And I think that bet is probably 80-20 right. You know what I mean? At this point,
I would agree, because it all goes back to the concept of having an agenda.
Yeah.
Why are you bothering to say this to us, regardless whether you're a corporation, an individual, a government? There's an agenda behind it. So when we were at school, when I was younger, we used to get given these like clippings of newspapers, and we were taught about the concept of bias, and we were taught the concept of challenging things. And like you and I have been trained in the concept of challenging the status quo, but we were taught that from a media perspective at a very young age. Yeah. And so I actually get a lot of my news from the BBC just online, but I just read the headlines, and I can just chaff away the left-wing rubbish.
Yeah.
Right. I'm like, what's going on in the world? So I'll read like the European, the Middle Eastern, the US side of things and all of that. And I just cut the chaff away. But then if I see something and I'm like, okay, that sounds like it's quite important, I'm going to go find the other side of that argument. Mm-hmm. Because there's always two sides of an argument, and somewhere in the middle is the truth.
Yeah.
And I think it's our duty to challenge every piece of information we're ever given. We should challenge everything. We should teach our kids to challenge everything, because everything that's told to you is done on the basis of an agenda. I am debating with you right now. I have my own agenda because I have my own beliefs. Likewise with you. So it is our duty to challenge everything and go and become informed on it by understanding the other sides of the debate, understanding what the other side of the person thinks. And this is where it kind of, you and I had those debates back in the day, but I tried to have those debates with some other guys who were Republicans, but they were kind of like more on the fascist side. And when questions of wars and things came up, they just got really irate. They were like, oh, I know this guy and he serves and all of that. And it was just this really irate reactionary response and just an inability to talk about the concept of the other side.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem. And we need to solve that. We need to teach our kids to challenge everything.
100%. I mean, when Afghanistan and Iraq wars started, I was 100% gung-ho, right? Let's go get those bastards. And I look back on it, and what a huge clusterfuck that was. It was,
The second Gulf War, you mean, yeah?
Yeah. 2003 invasion.
Well, it was an illegal invasion.
Yeah, absolutely. And so going back to Putin saying, hey, are they ever going to invade us? You know what I mean?
It was a distraction, wasn't it? It was a distraction. I mean, to be fair, we probably wouldn't have invaded Iraq if they had nuclear weapons. Um,
True, true.
but yeah, it was a complete distraction
But
for
I'll
the
tell you,
public.
like, I mean, the saber rattling that goes on here regarding Russia, I'm not sure they're afraid of a nuclear exchange, quite honestly, based upon their rhetoric.
That's
And
scary.
it's interesting if you go back and look at the Cuban Missile Crisis. You know, I read this book about it, and it was from the perspective of President Kennedy. And there's this scene where he's talking to shit. Who was the Soviet leader? Khrushchev, I think. Yeah, Khrushchev. And they're talking on the phone, and they're basically like commiserating because Kennedy is like, "My guys want to go to war," and Khrushchev is like, "So do my guys." And like these two leaders are the only people trying to find a way to not start a nuclear war.
Where you can both back down and no one loses face.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, you know, and quite honestly, that's what scares me the most about the United States government is the military industrial complex. Like I am convinced they run psychological ops in America all the time. And in fact, I think that's precisely what happened to Trump and the whole Russiagate thing. You know, certainly he's a dirty dude and he does some stupid shit. Mostly does stupid shit.
He just loves the audience, man. He just loves the audience. But you know, he's
But
also smart because he spent so much money in his election. He spent the majority of his money on messaging online by understanding the audience down to the most minute
Mhm.
segment.
He's a marketer.
So yeah, he's a marketer, and they
Yeah.
used you know, the whole Analytica thing. They used AI and big data to get the message right because they're like,
Forgotten about
okay,
that.
you're a Republican and you care about that. You're a
Yeah.
Republican, you care about that, so you're going to get that message. And
Yeah.
you know, it's very clever. But yeah, I mean, that happens all the time.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, you know, the whole exposure to the Steele dossier and you know the Mueller investigation and all that sort of thing. There were guys in the CIA like John Brennan, this guy in the FBI, the James Comey. They were running that as an operation, right? Like they did not like some Yahoo coming into Washington and trying to change things and upsetting the world order. And they look at themselves as the Praetorian Guard, you know, standing on the wall, keeping back the barbarians. And they could care less what the current president of the United States thinks about it.
Who
And
really runs it?
yeah, yeah. And when he started to get out of line, like trying to do, you know, remember he moved the Israeli embassy, the United States embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and you know, just like Brexit, the story was, oh my God, this is going to start World War III in the Middle East. Nothing happened, you know, like there's an element going on there that is very suspicious and untrustworthy and quite honestly concerning. I mean, one of the guys running for president here is RFK Jr., Robert Kennedy's son, and he's a blue blood Democrat, right? There's a lot of things that I wouldn't agree with him on policy wise, but I would vote for him for president in a second because he talks about this, and he will tell you that the CIA killed his uncle and his dad, and he was there when his dad was killed. He's like,
It is very interesting how the book depository was behind a right, but the brains exploded behind a right out.
yeah,
The exit wound came
yeah.
from the angle. And I've never seen anything that's explained that. I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any way. I have no idea who killed Kennedy. But it just seems a bit weird that the exit wound, which shattered the most part of his head, was from the same angle as
From
the right
it
wound.
went this, yeah, it went this way when
that's where the book depository was.
yeah. And there's a Netflix documentary. It's Oliver Stone, and it's called JFK Revisited.
I've seen that on there. I haven't watched it yet.
You should watch it. You will watch that, and after watching it, you're like, "There's no doubt the CIA was involved. There's no doubt." And you know, and it's like it's funny because if you look at the history of both the CIA and the FBI, they've been pulling this shit forever. I mean, you know, there's COINTELPRO, and you know, there's the you know, all the regime changes like Pinochet and others. You know, like
it happened in the Middle East in the '60s.
Yeah, and we're just supposed to expect that. Oh, they just stopped. Oh, they just stopped doing it one day, and they don't do it anymore. You know, and it's like, no, I mean, you know, they've been doing it for decades, and so yeah, again, that goes back to my whole ethos, man. It's like, I don't trust them, and I don't trust them. You know, the guy's with a gun in his hand says, give me your gun. No, no way, man. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
it's quite officious, when you go to the States. I mean, like go through border control. Um, I was going into San Fran, and they just don't give us many people for immigration that aren't US, right? So the US people, who are like 10% of the people on the plane, have like 5 people checking their passports or whatever. We had like 1 person, right? And there's like 5 flights came in. So there's like 1,000 of us there. And it's like 3.5 hours to go through. And the security, the guy who, like, when you're at the desk, he turns around and goes, reasons to visit. And I was just so tired, so pissed off. I wasn't even thinking. I said, well, obviously not fun after all that lot. And he didn't even laugh at it, because it was only meant to be like a light-hearted joke sort of thing. But he just looked at me deadpan, like, don't mess with me.
100%. I mean, our government is so damn inefficient. It's ridiculous. Like, I don't know if you remember, when my family went to London, and we had a nice chat in the brew. And but right the night before we left, I lost our passports. I was an idiot, and they were stolen. And it was a Friday night. So I called the US Embassy, and they're like, yeah, we're closed over the weekend. Show up on Monday.
Not there for that kind of stuff, mate.
Yeah, nobody's there. We can't help you. And then we were in the embassy for like 8 hours, that Monday. And then I tell this story to a friend of ours, Luke from Canada. He's like, the same thing happened to me, and the Canadian embassy people met me at the airport and had some documentation and walked me through customs and checking in and all that. I didn't even miss my flight. You know what I mean? And it's like, just the delta between those two experiences it's really, it's kind of sad, and it's the same theme, like why I don't want them running anything or taking my money. It's like they just waste it anyway. There's no efficiency. There's no, we've lost something. You know what I mean?
There's a certain level of immortality training that goes into your military and your police, of just supremacy that I feel, when I've been in the States, and it's very different over there, because our police don't carry guns for the most part.
Yeah.
There are armed police in certain places that are considered high terrorist threats, or whatever, but for the most part they're not. And they're far more approachable. And our military are challenged a lot more. The people that have been in the military, there isn't this diehard concept of, well, you must support us, I serve, blah 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 blah. I had mates who were in the Second Gulf War. I was actually offered to go to Sandhurst as they pay you for your degree at uni, and then you go and do 3 years serving. And so I had mates, and I had 2 that were in infantry and 2 that were in cavalry, which is basically tanks. Yeah. They were captains, and they came back, and the infantry guys were brain broken because of the stuff they saw. And the cavalry guys, they, one of them really challenged what they were doing and said, yeah, I served, I saw action. I'm not proud of it. I don't think that I did good there. But I don't think you would hear that as easily from an American troop.
Yeah.
Am I right in that assumption, or?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think I know folks that were disillusioned completely. In fact, I don't know if you remember, there was a guy when we worked together that was the George Washington of the truther movement, which is meaning it was an inside job, 9/11. And he had gone to Iraq, same thing, in infantry, and fought and came back like, just completely disillusioned with everything, and started on a campaign of convincing people that 9/11 was an inside job. The CIA and Bush did it. And so there's certainly an element of that. I think there's certainly folks, like I know another guy that says, look, man, I went over there with my brothers, and it's a band of brothers. And so, like, we don't get to decide, what the mission is, right? We focus on our thing, and we our goals. And so we're very proud of, what we did. But I read every day, man, like somebody's like, yeah, I served, I will not let my son do it. I think there's a lot of that.
I was told not to do it because it's not like here's us and here's them anymore. It's a little kid puts tugs on your trousers and he's put a grenade in your pocket.
Yeah.
I was told that you just never know what was going to happen.
Yeah.
Going back to we mentioned Vietnam, and that's a really contentious topic. And obviously, you stated America didn't win. And actually going back to it rounds back to politics because you had Ho Chi Minh, and he ran the North Vietnam, right? And he was a big socialist communist, and he really believed in it. And actually, his beliefs and his vision, I've read into it, was wonderful. It was very positive. It was true equality. He had no despot aspirations. But then the war got worse and more killing happened, and it allowed General Z to take over, and basically who was a military guy, and become more and more powerful in it and push Ho Chi Minh to the side. And that guy was a lunatic.
Mm-hmm.
He was terrible to his own people. He was a true dictator.
Yeah.
And so you look at how we go back to that concept of we haven't talked fully about immigration, but the us and them, and we don't want us to be impacted too much, and maybe we want to help them or not. But every time we help, we don't seem to fix the issue.
Yeah, it's hubris. It's hubris.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's very interesting because that's the thing that a government like communism, right? There's a certain element of, hey, this isn't for me, guys. I don't want to do this. This is what we're doing. You know what I mean? Like, you have to coerce people into a system like that. You know what I mean? Not everybody's going to go willingly, and it only works if everybody's in. And so it's a beautiful concept. I just think human nature, at least at this point in our development, it doesn't work. There's too much greed.
Because we're still, it's the accumulation of things. We're too fascinated by it.
Yeah, it's Solzhenitsyn, man. Like, it'd be nice if there was an evil person out there that I could just, go find and kill. But the truth is that evil runs through the middle of every person's heart. And so, yeah. And so, like, that Solzhenitsyn, he wrote the Gulag Archipelago. It's credited with like helping to bring down the Soviet Union. And because, again, it's a wonderful theory, but it doesn't, in practice, it causes a lot of challenges where people die. The history of the 20th century is fascists and totalitarians on the far ends of the political spectrum killing millions of people. You mentioned Stalin. I mean, Pol Pot probably killed 50 million. Who's the Chinese guy? Chiang Kai-shek? No, that was the nationalist. Who was the other guy? Mao Zedong. He killed tens of millions of people to implement
the Han.
Yeah.
So, apparently, we're all descended from Attila the Hun because he violated so many women.
Is that's Genghis Khan? I thought.
Right, Genghis Khan. You're right.
Yeah. Like, he's got like 40% of the DNA that exists.
Yeah, I'm like an anomaly in that because I come from Viking history, but the Vikings came over and they violated them, but then they killed them afterwards. So whoever my ancestor was just managed to survive that. Were you ever shown like the political lines from left to right, but as an almost attached circle?
Yeah.
So when you get so extreme right and so extreme left,
they look the same.
Practically the same.
Yeah, they look the same. I like the one that's a square, and it's like liberal conservative, but then on the top is statist, and on the bottom is libertarian. So you'd be like a left libertarian or a right libertarian, and a left statist and a right statist. And like, to me, this is the battle that we're in now. At least in America, it's not left versus right, although that's the game that they want us to play. It's state versus liberty. And maybe it always has been, but it's become very important, at least to me personally now. And
more apparent, I guess, as well.
Yeah. So
what would you like to see change in your country?
Oh, there's so many things.
From a political perspective, what would you like to see change?
Yeah. I'm really, the things that I'm most concerned about right now are, first, forever wars in foreign countries. So we need to return to a constitutional regime which says only Congress can declare war. And that just puts a siphon on the ability.
We've got to make Prime Minister can't make declaration. It's got to be a majority vote. You've got a single power at the top, an individual.
And it's not supposed to be that way. It's just developed that way over time. The presidents are like, fuck you, try and stop me, is really what's happened. And, you know, and that was Vietnam. It was a police action, right? We never declared war in Vietnam.
So it started with consultants, didn't it? And then it became police action.
Yeah. We paid for the French war there, just like we're paying for the Ukrainian war right now. And then when they lost, then we started sending troops over.
It was the same.
Yeah, it's very similar. It's very similar.
I don't think anyone has really won a war since the Second World War.
Yeah, because we're not willing to do what it takes to win anymore, and maybe rightfully so. Don't get me wrong, but like, war is fucking crazy, and you just kill as many people as you can until you win, and we're not willing to do that anymore. You know, the moment some body bags come back to America, it's like we're out. You know,
it's not even that many. I mean, compared to the Second World War, not even that many.
No, it's not, but it's just like completely unacceptable to the populace at this point. So I would do that and like bring a lot of, we have 750 military bases, you know, we're operating in something like 90 countries in some way or form. So
I used to get my pork in Qatar.
Yeah. So change that, bring everybody home. We have a huge immigration problem now. Our border is a lawless crisis. People, you know, 1,000 people die on that border every year. We have millions of people coming in illegally, and God love them, right? Like, I don't begrudge them, but it's just no system. And you see, you know, New York City is about to declare war on everybody because of the number of migrants that are there now, and they can't sustain it. It's just silly.
It's cyclical.
Yeah,
it becomes cyclical because the only way you can stop it is by getting that country or helping that country to get to a point where people don't want to leave anymore. But that then equals intervention on one way or another. And so you end up with this cyclical argument, don't you? Of like, well, troops, do you use economic aid? I mean, what happens? Then you get, you know, people like obviously take advantage of the situation. I mean, the only way you're going to stop true immigration is by everyone being happy where they are.
Well, yes. And building a wall.
Building a wall.
Nobody
dig holes, man. People can dig holes.
No, there's no illegal immigration in Israel. Let's just put it that way, right? And look, I think we need a positive, pragmatic immigration system where we find the best and the brightest and invite them to join us in this American experiment. But just letting anybody in who's willing to come is creating huge challenges. I mean, everyone who looks at this will tell you that the main reason that wages have stagnated over the past 30 years in America for the working class is immigration. Even Bernie Sanders used to say that all the time before it became a political problem because he wanted to be president. And so, like, it's a huge issue. And then I didn't even mention the worst part of it is fentanyl. That's where fentanyl is coming from. It's killing hundreds of thousands, or I forget the number, something like 100,000 people a year.
You just need better drugs in your country.
Yeah, that's right. So I would fix immigration. We have serious healthcare problems.
We haven't touched that yet, but yeah.
No. And I've actually changed my mind. Our healthcare continues to skyrocket. And, you know, there's a lot of inputs to that, but it's not just, you know, our insurance system. It's a big part of it. But
it's the corporations.
Yeah. But they're in cahoots with the government. I mean, the main people that wrote our last major healthcare thing, the Affordable Care Act, people call it Obamacare, it was written by lobbyists from the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies. You know, it is fascism in a very mild form of the combining of big corporations and the government to screw the little people. And you know, I don't have all the answers, but I would support something like, you know, I actually wrote about this yesterday, thecountry.news, and it's let's combine, like, the left wants Medicare for all, the right wants a free market system. I'm saying let's do both. Like, if you think of it, like, most of what we buy in America is insurance isn't actually insurance. It's a prepayment of services. It's Like
Yeah, it is.
your doctor's visits, you need labs, you need pharmaceuticals, whatever it is. Like you're prepaying for their guess at what you need, and they're making profit off of that. Forget all that. Take all of that shit out and have it be a free market system. And tell me Amazon and Walmart and others wouldn't figure out how to cut the costs and those things and make it the most efficient system possible. And then you have a national system for what I would call major catastrophic medical, like you get cancer, you go to the emergency room, you have a heart attack, you need surgery.
Break your leg.
Yeah. And that's just like all the other insurance. Like you have car insurance so that when you get in a wreck and you have this huge financial burden that you can't afford, you're indemnified by your insurance company, right? Let's do the same thing with health insurance and just have it be that, and then get some free market into the other stuff. And
like the NHS.
What's that?
It's a little bit like the NHS.
Is that how the NHS works?
Well, the NHS basically says that we will cover whatever we can cover, and we add things to it all the time. We contribute a small amount. The employers contribute a bit as well. But regardless of whatever medication I have to have, the price is the same. Mm-hmm. And it's affordable. It's like £8 something or £9 something. Mm-hmm. So whether I'm getting an antidepressant or I'm getting a cancer pill, it's the same. And then if I'm having hospital treatments, that's all built in. Now, on the downside, it's down to a centralized body to decide whether they're going to add a treatment for an ailment, but we still have the option to go private. Mm-hmm. I can still go and pay for private. And do you know how much I'm paying every year for the NHS? Mm-hmm. About £400. Right? And I've got a health system that will look after me for the most part. And if anything doesn't fit the bill, I'll go private.
Yeah. So whenever somebody brings that up from the left in America, the right comes back with, yeah, but you have to wait 6 months for a knee surgery and the carers and that.
Private. Go to India. There's still solutions, just the same as you have in the States. But you pay for it more.
Well, my question is, does that happen? Like, do you find it hard to get in to see a doctor or to get certain services?
So if I was going to label anything as something we're not good at, and I think this is the same everywhere, is mental health issues. Mm-hmm. We don't understand the brain enough. Our doctors aren't trained enough. The government and the NHS aren't geared up enough towards it. And mental health issues, I would say, cause a far larger strain on our economy than physical ailments.
We don't have a culture of therapy.
Yeah, we don't have this culture of therapy. So my wife's just talking there in the background.
Yeah, no, that's great.
We don't have a culture of therapy, but we also have this pill popping culture, which doesn't always solve things. So, talking from personal experience, it took me 26 years before I got the right diagnosis to get the right solution, because you walk in and you say, hey, I'm feeling this way, and they're like, oh, just take that. So I'd say that from a mental health perspective, it's very weak. But again, there's the private option. If you look at how much we pay, now a lot of the NHS things are subsidized by other taxes. So 85% of a packet of cigarettes is tax. That all goes into the NHS. Mm-hmm. You want to smoke? Great. We'll tax the shit out of it. We'll give it to the NHS. Because guess what? You're going to be there one day.
It's not going to fund your replacement lung, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And ironically, I've been told that lung cancer is one of the cheapest forms of cancer because it's got such a low survival rate. From 80%. But the point is that we pay a small amount, and we have this minimum. We have a bar, where a lot of stuff is covered. Yes, I might wait in A&E for 6 hours if all I've got is a broken finger or something, Mm-hmm. But we have this bar, and the two arguments I have on that is, if you can help people, why wouldn't you? And should anyone really be profiting on other people's misfortune?
Yes.
So the NHS negotiates the medications it takes from the US. The US hates it. It wants far more involvement, because obviously you have the largest powerhouse of pharmaceuticals. I believe we have the second. We've got 5 of the big 15 or big 20 or whatever it is. And they want more control over the medication influence that they can have. And the NHS is like, nah. And the government's like, well, there was arguments that Boris was going to give that away, but he didn't. But so we make these decisions and we add them to it, but on the basis of a negotiation, there is a big powerhouse that says, well, I'm going to have 100 million of those, rather than individual doctors saying, yeah, I'll do that for my patients. Mm-hmm. Like the whole lobbying that you get, or the sales reps you get in the States. So I've talked around a lot of circles there, but yeah, I'm a big proponent of helping people where you can.
Yeah, yeah. Do you is there malpractice suits in the UK? Like if a doctor screws up, can you sue them and win,
Yeah, things go wrong and people get paid out. Yeah, doctors
yeah.
screw up. I mean, wait, have you heard of the Lucy Letney case?
Uh-uh.
The nurse, she killed all these babies.
Oh yeah, the nurse, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so that goes under criminal. But then there was a doctor who basically took advantage of his gynecological position, and that was malpractice. And yeah, you get to sue the NHS. You sue the NHS itself. You don't sue the doctor has NHS insurance. He has to pay for it out of his practice. And don't get me wrong, doctors are still very wealthy over here. Yeah, they build a practice and they run a practice. They have the equity in the practice. They get targets from the NHS for inoculations and things like that, and they get bonuses. You know, they can be on like £250,000 a year, plus owning a practice with the equity in it, but they then get themselves for millions at the end of the process. So it's not like doctors don't have as much. So the legal threshold for negligence is very high, very protected.
Yeah.
But the point is, the NHS has that framework in place. They have the insurance in place, and yes, you can sue them for malpractice. You know,
Yeah.
and it's just sometimes it's just tough to get the right solution. So my father, you know, screwed up in the NHS, and there's no point in suing because money wouldn't solve it. He has Parkinson's, okay, and he went in for a colostomy bag. Do you call them colostomy bags over there?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, to be put in. And so there is an anaesthetic that is the main anaesthetic the NHS use, and you cannot give that to Parkinson's patients. It takes away half their brain.
Oh my God.
And mum was there with them all the way through, right until the point where the surgeon said, "You definitely not give me that. You definitely not give me that." And they gave him. And for 2 weeks, he was in a very different world, and he has never been fully the same since. You know, and yes, we could sue and we could probably get money out of it. It wouldn't be huge because of the age that he's at. You know, it would be based on how much is the rest of his living life and care and all of that, because he's 81 now. So we could have sued, but yeah, it was an issue and it was malpractice. And there are those mechanisms to do that. You know, I mean, it's a Tony Benn idea. It's a Tony Benn brought the NHS into play, and it's a bare minimum. A bit like benefits, though. You know, yes, people abuse it, but they're not the majority. Some people need the help. Like nurses get benefits because they're on 14.5, 15 grand a year. I'm very happy to pay a nurse a bit of a benefit that comes out of my tax money because she's the one that's really helping.
Yeah.
So I covered a lot of points.
No, that's good. It's good. I wanted to broach that with you because, my opinion has changed on this issue, mostly because of what we've gone through recently with COVID and the vaccines. I don't know how it's gone in the UK, though. I've heard some stories but here, I mean, the onion has been peeled back, and we've all realized that there is no control on these pharmaceutical companies. They do whatever the hell they want. They run their own tests. The folks at the FDA and the CDC, they rubber stamp everything because they're
the opioid thing, wasn't it?
So get this. Our Food and Drug Administration owns patents and made $4.6 billion on vaccines last year. And so it's all incestuous, and there's all these perverse incentives, and it makes no sense. And the reason I asked about malpractice is, we as a country in America, we have well over indexed on two employment roles, which are financiers and lawyers. And so we have way too many people in Wall Street making up synthetic CDOs to make money on them. And then we have way too many lawyers suing doctors, pharmaceuticals, insurance companies, hospitals, making billions of dollars on these lawsuits with really no controls. And part of it's good, right? You're holding people accountable, but the amounts involved just drive inflation. And then we have no regulator that regulates these things. I mean, our pharmaceutical companies have paid billions of dollars in, to the government for various crimes and misdemeanors and agreements to, forgo things. I mean, just look at, Dope Sick is another one on Netflix that is about the guys that invented OxyContin. And you watch all of that and you're just like, who is watching the damn store? And the answer is nobody. And so, like we have a serious problem. And it's not like, even if we went to Medicare for all, we'd still have the same problem, in my opinion. Like we have to fix all of that, not just who pays. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I believe that over here, the medication has to have been used elsewhere for a certain amount of time before the NHS will even consider it. Whereas if you look at the oxycodone, if they had turned up with the reps on the same day that they're releasing it in the US, the NHS would have said, nah, not interested. And the lobbying does exist against the NHS. It definitely does. In fact, it's probably one of the stronger lobbies that we have. We don't really have lobbying like you guys have in the US, but it is one of the stronger ones, which controls not necessarily the drugs the NHS choose, but the drugs that the NHS don't choose. There might be cheaper alternatives or have better effects or whatever. It's getting conspiracy theorist territory here, but I know people that have fallen victim to this. But yeah, we want it to be tried and tested. And yeah, that may cause some delay. But people have been medical tourists. They've gone to India to have hip replacements. They've gone to the States to have certain cancer therapies.
Yeah.
And that is still available to you on a private scale. Now, you guys pay it forward in the sense that you go through your whole life paying, as you say, extortionate amounts on healthcare on the possibilities that something may happen. So which is the better way around? Is that the better way around? Or is it better that you say, well, I tell you what, I'll bank that money, put it in a synthetic CDO, triple my money overnight, right? Triple my money overnight, and then I'll keep it as a little fail-safe if something goes wrong.
Yeah. I think people would be better off. I mean, I was shocked to find out recently. I recently resigned from a corporate job, and of course, here a lot of it is paid by your employer, the healthcare costs, the insurance costs, I should say. And so we have this thing called COBRA, which is when you leave such a place and you don't have insurance, you're able to stay on that same insurance for a period of time. And it's $3,000 a month. $3,000. Now, granted,
for a person or for your whole family?
For the whole family. But and granted, we were on a plan. It's called a Cadillac plan, right? Like no, all these bells and whistles on it. But nonetheless, even like the cheapest thing because we do now have the Obamacare. You can go online and buy health insurance from the government, and you put into a pool and all that. Even the cheapest one is like $1,200 a month, and it doesn't cover a lot of stuff. So to your point, man, I could take $3,000 and put it in a bank, and that's 36 grand a year. 10 years, I got 360 grand. Like
one of you has a problem, go spend it.
Yeah,
especially if the base minimum is already covered through a national health service, like broken legs, like your teeth, like whatever. Like I cut myself and I need stitches, like athlete's foot.
Yeah, so we've got to do something.
You're becoming a little socialist, you are.
It is. I have felt myself change on a number of issues. I'm rooting for the unions over here. The UAW is about to strike against General Motors and Stellaris, which is the old Chrysler, and they're like, listen, car sales have gone up 35% over the past 4 years. CEO pay has gone up 40%. Our pay is still the same. We want 40% increase, and they're striking as of today for it. And 10 years ago, I would have been like, those assholes, what are they doing? But now I'm like, no, they're just getting screwed by the fat cats, just like the rest of us. So
that goes straight back to your concept of uniting to defend yourself against an issue, which is the same reason why you carry weapons.
Yeah.
That's your union. That is your union.
You know what it is? It's got a name. It's populism. And populism has a negative connotation in almost every social circle. And my thing now is why? I mean, God, the greatest president perhaps of the United States history was President Lincoln. And his most famous phrase is that government by the people, of the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. The government is supposed to be for the people. Populism should be what everyone supports. You know what I mean? And it's interesting that it's, back to your point about Schadenfreude and some other things. It's like, They figured out how to make it a dirty word. You know what I mean? It's a dirty word to advocate for the people. Makes sense.
People used to call me socialist when I came over to Ames, and I'm like, believe me, I'm a conservative.
Yeah.
But there are certain things that I think are good. You know, that if you can provide them, do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at the same time, I don't want levels of so I guess I have libertarian views in certain ways. You know, which is why I always enjoy debating with you because of the libertarian approach rather than the extreme sort of Republican Boston Tea Party type approach, you know, which is a very different argument to have because you just can't relate on anything. Well, I can't relate on anything, and people just used to get upset.
Yeah,
but,
it's funny.
Yeah,
I was a Tea Party guy, but just in the beginning, and it was just like, you know, the same concept we've been talking about all the time. It's like the Tea Party, right? Quite honestly, oh, you want to tax my tea? Here it is. I'm throwing it in the ocean. You know what I mean? That sort of concept. It's funny. I remember. So I watch CNBC all the time here. I don't even know if it's on over there, but
yeah, we get it.
But I was watching on TV when the Tea Party started. It was this one guy named Rick something. I can't remember his last name, and he was like, it was in the middle of the financial crisis and the you know, the Big Short, right, in 2008, and he's like, and he just started on a rant, and you know, and you're watching him, he's standing on the stock market and these brokers turn around and they start cheering and all of them gather around and they're just like, yeah. And that was the start of the Tea Party. Like that's literally where it started. And, you know, it was everything's a reaction, right? It's thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? It was a reaction to Obamacare. It was a reaction to this broad takeover of the healthcare system. The biggest thing that was concerning about the way that came about here was like, it was just one party that did it. You know, something as big as that, like, I don't know when the National Health Service started, but hopefully, you know, 70-80% of the folks in Parliament said, yeah, let's do this. Here it was like barely 50%, and they had to do some sweetheart backroom deals to get there.
It's so bipolar over there, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And so it just felt like...
And so it is over here too.
Yeah, yeah. It's sad.
But the closest we've had to centralist government, but the two parties were as close as they could be coming together was during the Blair regime. And I have a lot of issues with Blair. I mean, I believe he should be tried for war crimes.
Because of Iraq?
His debating was incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because of the second Iran war. I think it was what he did. But he was telling our question time. You know, if we don't have like, because of question time, it's like it's a debate. Yeah, there's no script.
I love those.
He was such a good debater. He's so intelligent. I started to believe in it because I was like, yeah, I want the smartest person in the room with this thing on the bus, right?
Yeah.
And he was proving that he was the smartest person in the room. Now, he was a really bad thing, in my opinion. But he brought the left to the centre. And by doing that, the right came closer to the centre. And therefore, you had more majority movement within the process, which added to cohesion, which meant that we got more shit done. But we also were less antagonistic about all this. Now we're back to the whole vibe, you know, Corbyn just took the left back to the Marxism.
Yeah.
You know, he literally was caught walking around with the Communist Manifesto.
He got a lot of red press over here.
And he's got that range lady. Sorry?
Oh, I said it. Corbyn got a lot of bad
press.
Corbyn got a lot of bad press over here for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
oh.
You know, I just think. But now the left are like doing the whole reactionary stuff, the right are doing the whole reactionary stuff, and now we're bipolar. I mean, not as extreme as I would say in the US. In the US, but it's pretty bad. Now, to quote South Park, you're always voting between a giant fish and a pig.
I think we should end it there, my friend. Because I couldn't agree more. I love South Park, and I agree 100%. And you know, we started getting a little talk back on the interwebs there. So this has been an amazing conversation. I would love to do it with you again if you'd be so kind. But why don't we go ahead and just say thank you
I like talking to you, mate, and it's been a real honor to be part time, especially for a little bit. So I hope I haven't been too expensive. Thank you very much for making the time.
You've been wonderful. I hope you come back again.
All right. Nice to be in the family.
All right.